In the glittering world of the ultra-rich secrets, our currency and reputation is everything. Tonight, at the annual St. Jude's Charity Gala, one of those secrets is about to explode in the most public and brutal way imaginable. You're about to hear the story of Sophie Peterson, a woman trapped in a gilded cage, and her husband, Mark Jennings, a man whose ambition was matched only by his cruelty. But what Mark didn't know was that in the shadows of the ballroom, two lions were watching over their family. And when he laid a hand on his pregnant wife, he didn't just break his marriage vows, he signed a contract for his own complete and utter destruction, delivered instantly by her two CEO cousins. This isn't a story about slow-burning revenge. This is about a life dismantled in a matter of hours. Stay tuned. The ballroom of the Astoria Grand was a galaxy of manufactured stars. Diamonds glittered on necks and wrists, catching the light from chandeliers that dripped crystal like frozen tears. It was the annual St. Jude's Children's Hospital Charity Gala, the pinnacle of the city's philanthropic season, where fortunes were pledged on the strength of a handshake and reputations were polished to a blinding sheen. To the outside world, Sophie and Mark Jennings were the perfect embodiment of this world. Sophie, 6 months pregnant and radiant in a deep sapphire gown that clung to her curves, smiled until her cheeks ached. Her family, the Petersons, weren't just wealthy. They were foundational, their name etched onto university libraries and hospital wings. She had grown up with a quiet grace, preferring books to ballrooms. But she understood her duties. Her smile was one of them. Mark Jennings, her husband of 3 years, stood beside her, his hand possessively on the small of her back. He was handsome in a sharp, predatory way, with a smile that never quite reached his cold, calculating eyes. He had come from nothing a fact he simultaneously weaponized and concealed. He was a junior partner at a prestigious finance firm, a position he'd secured not through sheer brilliance, but through the powerful current of his wife's family name. And he never let her forget it. "Darling, you're drifting." Mark murmured his voice, a low hum against her ear, his fingers digging into her side just enough to be a warning. "Mr. Henderson is watching. Look engaged." Sophie blinked, pulling her attention back from the orchestra to the portly, balding man across the room. David Henderson was the senior managing partner of Mark's firm. An introduction to Sophie's cousins was the prize Mark was hunting tonight. "I'm sorry, Mark. The baby was just kicking," she offered a soft, practiced excuse. His smile tightened. "Of course. Just try to focus. This is a big night for us." For me, he meant. It was always about him. Sophie's true family. The anchors of her life were her maternal cousins, Conrad Beaumont and Grant Wallace. They were more like brothers to her. After her parents' tragic death in a sailing accident when she was 18, Conrad and Grant had become her fierce protectors. They were different as night and day. Conrad the Elder was the CEO of Beaumont Innovations, a global tech conglomerate that shaped how the world communicated. He was a spectre in the business world, rarely seen endlessly powerful. He moved with a chilling stillness, his mind always processing, calculating. He saw the world in data points and vulnerabilities, and he missed nothing. Grant was the public face of power. As the CEO of Wallace Estates, he built skylines. He was charismatic, athletic, and possessed a charm that could disarm armies. But beneath the warm smile was a core of unyielding steel reserved exclusively for the protection of his family. They were both here tonight, holding court in different corners of the room. Sophie felt a pang of longing She wanted nothing more than to be with them, to bask in their genuine affection. But Mark had skillfully isolated her over the years, making such interactions feel like a betrayal of him. The tension between Sophie and Mark had been simmering all evening. It started in the car when Mark criticized the vintage pearl earrings she wore a gift from her late mother. "They make you look dated, Sophie. We need to project youth success." He wanted her to wear the gaudy diamond set he'd bought her, the one that felt like a collar. Now, as the auction began, the pressure intensified. Mark was bidding aggressively on a yachting weekend in Monaco, an item far beyond their actual means. It wasn't about the trip. It was about performing for Henderson. "Mark, please," Sophie whispered, placing a hand on his arm as the bidding climbed past $50,000. "We can't afford that." He shook her hand off his jaw tight. "Don't embarrass me. It's an investment." He glanced at Henderson, who gave him a small, approving nod. Mark's chest puffed out. He won the item at $65,000, and the room applauded politely. Sophie felt sick. It was $65,000 of her money from the trust her parents had left her. Mark controlled their joint finances with an iron fist, giving her a meager allowance while he spent lavishly on his own ambitions. Later, as they mingled, Grant found his way to her. His warm hug was like coming home. "Soph, you look breathtaking. How are you feeling? How's my little nephew or niece doing in there?" "We're good, Grant," she said, her smile finally genuine, just a little tired. Mark materialized at her side, draping an arm over her shoulders. "Grant, good to see you. Just telling my wife she needs to conserve her energy. It's a marathon, this social scene." The implication was clear. Our conversation is over. Grant's eyes, a warm hazel, flickered with something sharp as he looked at Mark's hand on Sophie's shoulder. He'd never liked Mark had privately expressed his concerns to Conrad years ago. But Sophie had been so sure, so in love. They had respected her choice, but they had never stopped watching. "Of course," Grant said smoothly, his gaze returning to Sophie. "Don't be a stranger, Soph. Conrad and I were just talking about the new wing at the children's home. We'd love your input." "I'd love that," she began. But Mark cut her off. "We'll have to schedule it. Our calendar is just packed," he said, steering her away. "Henderson is finally free. Let's go." The introduction was as sycophantic as Sophie had feared. Mark was a different person. Deferential, charming, full of praise for his brilliant, supportive wife. Henderson was polite, his eyes lingering on Sophie's baby bump with a grandfatherly smile. The entire performance made Sophie's skin crawl. The final straw came near the end of the night. Sophie was speaking with an old family friend when Mark approached, his face a mask of thunder. He grabbed her elbow, his grip painfully tight. "What did you say to Henderson's wife?" he hissed, pulling her toward the deserted marble terrace. "What, nothing? We were just talking about nurseries," Sophie said, trying to pull her arm free. "Don't lie to me." She just gave me the coldest look. "You said something. You're always undermining me. Making me look small." "Mark, that's not true. I would never." The accusation was absurd. He was paranoid, his ego as fragile as spun glass. The pressure of the evening, of his constant need for validation, had finally made him crack. All you had to do was smile and look pretty. He spat, his voice low and venomous. He backed her against the cold stone balustrade. The distant sound of the orchestra was the only witness. "But you can't even do that outright. You and your high and mighty family." "You think I need you?" You think I need them? That's not fair. Mark. Tears welled in her eyes. Tears of frustration and fear. My family has given you everything. It was the wrong thing to say. It was the truth, and the truth was the one thing Mark Jennings could not tolerate. His face contorted in rage. Everything you've given me a leash. A golden leash. He raised his hand. For a split second, Sophie thought he would just gesture, just vent his fury into the night air. She was wrong. The slap was sharp, a crack that echoed in the sudden silence of the terrace. Her head snapped to the side, the sting so immediate and shocking it stole her breath. Her hand flew to her cheek, her mind reeling. He had been cruel before, verbally, emotionally. He had grabbed her, pushed her, but he had never, ever hit her. Not like this. Stunned, she looked up at him, her vision blurry with tears. His rage had vanished, replaced by a flicker of panic. But it was too late. The act was done, and he had made one catastrophic miscalculation. He thought they were alone. From the shadows of the arched doorway leading back to the ballroom, two figures emerged. They hadn't been there a moment ago, but they were there now, as if summoned by the violence itself. Conrad Beaumont and Grant Wallace stood side by side, their tuxedos perfectly tailored, their faces utterly devoid of emotion. But their eyes burned with a cold fire that promised an apocalypse. The lions had seen the jackal strike, and the hunt had just begun. The world seemed to slow down. The faint music from the ballroom, the cool night air, the distant city lights, it all faded into a muffled backdrop for the scene frozen on the terrace. Sophie's cheek throbbed a hot, blossoming pain that was nothing compared to the cold dread coiling in her stomach. Mark's face was a canvas of shock and dawning horror as he stared past her at the two men in the doorway. Grant moved first. He didn't run. He glided across the marble with a speed that was both graceful and terrifying. Each step was silent, deliberate, eating up the distance between them. There was no anger on his face yet, just an unnerving, absolute focus. Mark Ever, the performer, tried to recover. He forced a laugh, a strangled, ugly sound. Grant Conrad. Just a little marital spat. You know how it is. Hormones. He reached for Sophie as if to prove his point, to pull her into a comforting embrace. Grant's hand shot out and clamped around Mark's wrist like a manacle. Mark winced, his bravado instantly crumbling. Grant's grip was immense, the product of years of early morning workouts and an iron will. He wasn't just holding Mark. He was pinning him, neutralizing him. "Take your hand off my cousin," Mark Grant said. His voice was eerily calm, a low rumble that carried more menace than any shout ever could. He twisted Mark's wrist just slightly, and a choked gasp escaped Mark's lips. He let go of Sophie as if she were on fire. Conrad remained in the doorway, a silent, imposing silhouette. He hadn't moved a muscle, but his presence filled the space. His eyes, dark and analytical, were fixed on the red mark blooming on Sophie's cheek. He was cataloguing the damage, processing the transgression. In that moment, he wasn't a cousin. He was a machine calculating variables for a war that Mark Jennings didn't even know had been declared. Sophie, still reeling, stumbled back against the balustrade. Grant immediately released Mark and stepped between them, creating a human shield. He gently cupped her face, his thumb brushing near the angry red mark. "Are you okay, Soph? Did he hurt you anywhere else?" She could only shake her head, a sob finally breaking free. The shame, the pain, the terror, It all came crashing down, but mixed with it was a new, overwhelming wave of relief. She wasn't alone. Mark, rubbing his wrist, tried to salvage the unsalvageable. Now listen, this is a misunderstanding. Sophie is overwrought. The pregnancy— Say the word pregnancy one more time, Grant warned, turning his head slowly to face him. I dare you. The mask of civility had completely fallen from Grant's face, replaced by a look of pure, controlled fury. This was the Grant that hostile corporate raiders and stubborn city planners whispered about, the man who could smile while he tore your world apart. Mark took a step back, finally understanding the depth of the chasm he had just opened. These weren't just Sophie's well-connected cousins. They were titans. He had built his entire career on the periphery of their power, and he had just attacked the center of their universe. Conrad finally moved, stepping fully onto the terrace. He pulled out his phone, a sleek, custom-built device. He tapped the screen a few times, his movements economical and precise. "What are you doing?" Mark asked, his voice trembling. "Calling the police. Don't be ridiculous. This is a private matter." Conrad looked up from his phone, and for the first time he spoke. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper, yet it cut through the night like a shard of ice. "The police are too temporary, Mark. Their solutions are inefficient." He paused, his gaze sweeping over Mark from head to toe, as if appraising a faulty piece of equipment. "I'm calling Mr. Davies. He's my head of security. He's already on his way up. He will escort Sophie from the premises." He then looked at Sophie, his expression softening for a fraction of a second. "Sophie, you're coming with us. You're not spending another second with this thing." The word thing hung in the air, a deliberate, dehumanizing strike. Panic seized Mark. His public image, his career, his carefully constructed life, he could see it all shattering. "No, Sophie, tell them. Tell them it was a mistake. I love you." "I'm sorry, I was stressed. I didn't mean it." He tried to move toward her, but Grant blocked him with an immovable shoulder. "You don't get to speak to her anymore," Grant stated flatly. Sophie, holding her cheek, found her voice. It was shaky, but it was there. I'm going with them, Mark." The finality in her tone hit him harder than the physical restraint. He looked from Grant's unyielding glare to Conrad's chillingly calm demeanor. He was outmatched, outmaneuvered, and utterly doomed. Just then, a man who seemed to be composed entirely of sharp angles and tailored black fabric appeared at the terrace door. Mr. Davies. He was of average height, but carried himself with the lethal stillness of a bomb disposal expert. He nodded once at Conrad. Davies Conrad said, his tone purely transactional. "Take Ms. Peterson to the car. Use the private elevator. Ensure no one sees her face." "Of course, sir." Davies approached Sophie with a surprising gentleness. "Ma'am, if you'll come with me." He held out a hand not to touch her, but as a respectful invitation. Sophie took it, her own hand trembling. As she was led away, Mark made one last desperate plea. "Sophie, don't do this. We can fix this. Think about the baby." At the mention of the baby, Conrad's head snapped toward him. He took 2 steps forward, invading Mark's personal space. Mark instinctively tried to back away, but found the stone balustrade at his back. He was trapped. "You will never speak of her child again," Conrad said, his voice dropping to a near inaudible, menacing whisper. "That child is a Peterson. It is a Beaumont. It is a Wallace. It is no longer any concern of yours. Do you understand me?" Mark could only nod, his throat tight with fear. Conrad continued, his eyes like black chips of ice. In about 5 minutes, Grant and I are going to walk back into that ballroom. We are going to smile, and we are going to mingle. You, however, are going to feel your phone buzz. It will be a notification from your bank. Your personal account, the one filled with Sophie's trust fund money, has been frozen, pending a fraud investigation. A moment later, your corporate credit cards will be declined. Then you will receive an email from a gossip columnist with a subject line asking for comment on an anonymous tip about a prominent finance executive assaulting his pregnant wife at a charity gala. Attached will be a security still from a camera you didn't know was there. Mark's face went white. He glanced around the terrace wildly. There were no visible cameras. There are always cameras, Conrad said, as if reading his mind. You just have to own the building to get the footage. He gestured vaguely to the glittering city. Grant owns this building. Grant, who had been watching in grim satisfaction, added his own parting shot. And Mark, he said, his voice casual, almost friendly. I just had a lovely chat with David Henderson. Mentioned I was thinking of moving a substantial part of our portfolio. He was very interested. Then I mentioned how disappointed I was to see how he employed men who can't handle their pressure. Men who take it out on women. I believe my exact words were, "It shows a profound lack of character, and character is the only currency I trade in." I don't think he'll be taking your calls tomorrow, or ever again. Mark's legs gave out. He slid down the balustrade, slumping to the ground in his $1,000 tuxedo, a broken puppet with its strings cut. Conrad looked down at him, his face a mask of utter contempt. This isn't the revenge, Mark. This is the overture. We're just getting started. He turned, and with Grant at his side, walked back into the dazzling light of the ballroom, leaving Mark Jennings alone in the darkness, a ghost at a party that was no longer his. The unmasking was complete. The demolition was about to begin. The ride from the gala was a silent, surreal blur. Mr. Davies drove the custom Maybach with an unnerving smoothness, navigating the city's arteries as if they were his own private pathways. Sophie sat huddled in the plush leather interior, a cashmere throw blanket that had appeared from nowhere draped around her shoulders. Grant sat beside her, not touching, but radiating a protective warmth that kept the shivering at bay. Conrad sat opposite them, his face illuminated by the cool glow of his phone as his thumbs moved in a rapid, silent dance of destruction. They didn't go to Sophie's home, the house that was legally hers, but had become Mark's stage. They didn't go to one of Grant's opulent penthouses that were frequently splashed across architecture magazines. Instead, they drove to a discreet, almost anonymous building in a quiet, historical part of the city. Conrad owned the entire building, a fact known to only a handful of people. It was his private sanctuary, his fortress of solitude, and tonight it would be Sophie's. The private elevator opened directly into a sprawling apartment that felt less like a home and more like a serene, minimalist art gallery. The ceilings were impossibly high, and one entire wall was a sheet of glass offering a breathtaking panoramic view of the city lights. The furniture was sparse, elegant, and brutally expensive. There was no clutter, no personal photographs, only clean lines and quiet order. It was the physical manifestation of Conrad's mind. A woman in a simple grey dress was waiting for them. She had kind, intelligent eyes and a calm demeanor. "This is Dr. Helen Webb," Conrad said, his voice softening as he addressed Sophie. "She's a friend, and the best OB-GYN in the country. She's here to make sure You and the baby are all right." Sophie, who had been functioning on autopilot, felt a fresh wave of tears threaten. The thoughtfulness of it, the quiet, efficient care, was so starkly different from Mark's loud, performative concern that was always about himself. She allowed Dr. Webb to lead her into a large, tranquil bedroom. While Sophie was being examined, Grant paced the length of the glass wall like a caged tiger. "I want to kill him, Conrad. I swear I want to go back there and break him into 1,000 pieces, and that would solve nothing," Conrad replied, without looking up from his tablet, where he was now orchestrating a far more complex attack. "Physical pain is temporary. It heals. What we are going to do to him is permanent. We are going to erase him." "What have you done so far?" Grant asked, running a hand through his hair. "Phase 1 is containment." Conrad explained, his voice the detached monotone of a general outlining a battle plan. His access to Sophie's primary trust is frozen. "I used our family council to flag a series of suspicious withdrawals Mark made over the last year. Our grounds are undue influence and potential spousal fraud. It's legally sound and will tie up that capital for months, if not years." "He has his own money," Grant countered. "He has a salary," Conrad corrected. "A salary which, as of about 10 minutes ago, he no longer receives. I made a call to 2 majority board members at his firm. They are old friends of our father. I sent them a single pixel-perfect image of Sophie's cheek. I told them that an employee's character reflects on the firm's reputation and that the Wallace Beaumont family was re-evaluating all of its financial partnerships. Mark Jennings will be fired by 9:00 a.m. tomorrow. His termination clause will be voided due to a morality breach. He will get no severance." Grant stopped pacing, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. "Good. What else? I've initiated a digital quarantine. Our cybersecurity team at Beaumont Innovations is currently walling him off. His personal emails, his cloud storage, his social media. They will all experience a series of cascading, untraceable technical failures. He will be a ghost in the machine he relies on. Furthermore, any attempt he makes to contact Sophie by phone, email, or any other digital means will be rerouted to a dedicated server in my office, logged and blocked. He will be screaming into a void." The door to the bedroom opened, and Dr. Webb emerged. Both men fell silent, turning to her with identical anxious expressions. "She's okay," the doctor said gently. "Her blood pressure is elevated as expected, but the baby's heartbeat is strong and steady. There are no signs of immediate distress. The mark on her face is superficial, but I'm more worried about her emotional state. She's been under an immense amount of stress for a long time, I suspect." Sophie appeared behind her, wrapped in a plush white robe. Her face was clean of makeup, her eyes red-rimmed and exhausted, but for the first time in years, the haunted, hunted look in them had begun to recede. "He told me I was being hysterical," Sophie whispered, her voice hoarse. "For months. Every time I questioned him about money, about the late nights, about his temper, he'd twist it. He said the pregnancy was making me paranoid and emotional. It was a classic abuser's tactic, gaslighting, the methodical erosion of a victim's confidence in their own sanity." Grant's hands clenched into fists at his sides. Conrad's jaw tightened, the only outward sign of his rage. "He isolated me." Sophie continued, her voice gaining a bit of strength as she finally spoke the truth aloud. "He'd find reasons to argue with me right before I was supposed to see friends. He'd criticize my family, saying you all looked down on him, so I felt guilty every time I spent time with you. He made my world so small until he was the only thing in it." She looked at her cousins, her eyes pleading for them to understand. "I'm so sorry. I should have seen it. I should have been stronger." "Don't you dare apologize," Grant said, his voice thick with emotion. He finally closed the distance between them and pulled her into a gentle, fierce hug. "This is not your fault. This is his. We're sorry. We should have seen it sooner. We should have pushed harder." Over her shoulder, Grant's eyes met Conrad's. The unspoken vow passed between them. Never again. Conrad stepped forward, placing a hand on Sophie's arm. "Sophie, we need to ask you something, and it's important. Did he ever force you to sign any financial documents you didn't understand? Did he ever talk about investments or business ventures using your name?" Sophie frowned, thinking. "About a year ago, there was a private real estate venture. He said it was a foolproof way to double our investment. It was a lot of paperwork. I was hesitant, but he got angry. He said I didn't trust his business acumen, that I was treating him like a child." She looked down, ashamed. "I signed them." Conrad and Grant exchanged another look. This was new information, a dark new layer to Mark's depravity. He wasn't just an abuser and a social climber. He was a con artist. "Okay," Conrad said, his mind already working, fitting this new piece into his strategic puzzle. "That's good to know. Thank you for telling us." He didn't elaborate, not wanting to burden her with more worry. But the nature of the war had just changed. This was no longer just about retribution for a slap. This was about dismantling a predator who had been using their family's name and their cousin's heart as tools for his crimes. "What happens now?" Sophie asked, her voice small. Now Conrad said with absolute certainty, "You rest. You are safe here. No one in the world knows this address besides the 4 people in this room. Davies will be stationed outside your door. You eat, you sleep, and you think about names for the baby. You let us handle the rest. We're going to burn his world to the ground." Soph Grant added his tone, leaving no room for doubt. "And then we're going to salt the earth so nothing ever grows there again." For the first time that night, a tiny, watery smile touched Sophie's lips. She felt the immense weight she had been carrying for years begin to lift. She was in a fortress, surrounded by the only army she would ever need. The cage was broken. Mark Jennings woke up the next morning on the cold marble floor of the terrace. His tuxedo was wrinkled, his head pounded from a combination of stress and the 2 glasses of champagne he'd had hours earlier, and a deep, soul-crushing dread had settled in his bones. For a moment he tried to tell himself it was a nightmare, but the throbbing in his wrist where Grant had grabbed him and the ghostly image of Conrad's dead eyes were brutally real. He scrambled for his phone. He had to call Sophie. He had to fix this. Apologize, charm, manipulate, whatever it took. He'd done it 100 times before. He dialed her number. It rang once, then went straight to a crisp, automated message. "The number you have dialed is no longer in service." Panic flared. He tried again. Same result. He sent her a text, a long, rambling paragraph of apologies and declarations of love. No delivery receipt. He tried to log into her social media, an account for which he'd secretly acquired the password months ago. Incorrect password. "Fine," he muttered to himself, his hands shaking. "Fine. They're blocking me. I'll deal with that later. First, damage control at work." He needed to get ahead of whatever Grant had said to Henderson. He opened his banking app to check his balance, planning to wire a generous donation to Henderson's favorite charity as a goodwill gesture. The screen loaded, and his blood ran cold. Account balance $0. 000. Account status. Frozen. Pending investigation. No. No, no, no. He frantically tapped on the screen. It was the joint account, the one holding the bulk of Sophie's quarterly trust payment. His lifeline. Gone. He tried his personal credit card next, attempting to book a car service. Card declined. He tried his corporate Amex. Card declined. A cold sweat broke out on his forehead. Conrad's threat from the night before echoed in his ears. This is the overture. He stumbled out of the gala, avoiding the morning cleaning crews, and managed to hail a taxi, paying with the last $200 of cash he had in his wallet. The entire ride to his office, he rehearsed his speech for Henderson. It was a misunderstanding, a private matter. His wife was emotional. He would smooth it over. He walked into the gleaming lobby of Henderson, Lynch and Sterling with as much swagger as he could muster. The receptionist, a young woman who usually greeted him with a flirtatious smile, looked through him as if he were glass. "Mr. Henderson is expecting me," he lied. "Mr. Jennings," she said, her voice flat and professional. "I was asked to give you this." She slid a thick envelope across the marble counter. His name was typed on the front. Inside was a single-page letter. He was terminated effective immediately for a severe breach of the company's morality clause. His access to the building had already been revoked. A box with his personal effects would be couriered to his home. He read the letter 3 times, but the words wouldn't make sense. Fired. It wasn't possible. He was a rising star. Henderson loved him. He looked up from the letter and saw 2 stern-faced security guards approaching him. "Sir, you need to leave the premises now." Humiliation burned his cheeks. He was being escorted out of his own office building like a common criminal. The entire lobby was watching. He spent the rest of the morning in a frantic spiral, sitting in a coffee shop using their public Wi-Fi. Every digital door was slamming shut in his face. His corporate email account was gone. His personal email was flooded with spam, thousands of emails per minute, making it impossible to find anything important. His LinkedIn profile was suddenly inaccessible. He tried to call his lawyer, but the call wouldn't connect. He tried to call his tech-savvy younger brother, but his phone seemed unable to make outgoing calls to anyone not already in his recent call list. It was as if a ghost was living in his phone, selectively curating his reality, isolating him. This was Conrad's world, the digital realm. Mark was a tourist here. Conrad was a god. He was being systematically erased 1 byte at a time. Every system he relied on, every convenience of modern life, was being turned against him. He felt a profound and terrifying sense of helplessness. He was digitally blind, deaf, and mute. Desperate, he remembered the real estate deal he'd had Sophie sign. It was his ace in the hole, a shady but potentially lucrative development deal with some questionable partners. It was his escape plan, his screw-you money to the Peterson family. The contracts were stored in his personal cloud account. He tried to log in. Account not found. He felt the air leave his lungs. The files, the contacts, the proof of his one clever move, all gone. It was like they had never existed. By noon, a new horror emerged. He got a Google alert for his own name. A small but venomous article had been published on a notorious city gossip blog. It was titled, "High Finance Husband, High Society Scandal." The article was clever, avoiding a direct accusation. It spoke of an unseemly public argument at the St. Jude's Gala, involving a prominent junior partner and his pregnant, blue-blooded wife. It mentioned that the wife had to be escorted from the event by her concerned family. But the masterstroke was the photo. It was a grainy, long lens shot, clearly taken by a professional. It showed Mark on the terrace, his hand raised, his face a mask of rage. Sophie was cowering. Her face turned away. It was damning. It was irrefutable. And it was now public. His phone, which had been so silent, began to buzz. But it wasn't Sophie. It was his golf buddies, his so-called friends, the sycophants who had orbited him because of his connection to the Petersons. The texts were all variations on the same theme. Saw the blog. Don't call me again. My wife is furious. We're done, Mark. You're a disgrace. He was a leper. His social network was dissolving in real time, burned away by the acid of public shame. This wasn't Conrad's work. This was Grant, the social executioner. By 3:00 p.m. Mark Jennings was sitting on a park bench, his phone a useless brick, his wallet nearly empty, his career in ashes and his name synonymous with domestic abuse. He had lost everything that defined him, his money, his status, his connections. He had thought his life was a skyscraper. He had built himself. He now realized it was a house of cards, and his cousins-in-law had just blown it down with a single calculated breath. He had nothing left, except for one thing: his rage. The fear was slowly being replaced by a hot, bitter fury. They thought they could do this to him. Erase him. He knew where Sophie would go. She would run to one of their safe houses. He knew of a few, the penthouse. Grant kept the lake house Conrad's family had owned for generations. He would find her. He had to. He would make her see, make her understand. Make her tell them to stop. He wasn't erased yet. He was still here. And he was going to get his wife back. He stood up from the bench, a man with nothing to lose. And in the cold, strategic world of Conrad Beaumont and Grant Wallace, a man with nothing to lose was the most dangerous and unpredictable variable of all. While Conrad Beaumont waged a silent digital war, Grant Wallace took to the field. His battleground was the city's intricate web of power, reputation, and influence, and his weapons were a phone and a lifetime of carefully cultivated relationships. From the quiet of his chauffeured Bentley, he began dismantling Mark Jennings's social existence one call at a time. His first was to Albert Monroe, the venerable president of the Oakwood Preserve Country Club, a place Mark desperately coveted. Albert Grant Wallace, he began his voice, warm but firm. I'm calling regarding Mark Jennings. There's been a profound disappointment in his character. I am formally withdrawing my sponsorship and would strongly advise the board to permanently reconsider his application. In their world, no further explanation was needed. A man's character was his bond, and Grant had just declared Mark's bankrupt. By mid-morning, Mark was blacklisted. Next, he called the director of the St. Jude's Foundation. He didn't shout or threaten. He simply expressed his deep concern over the unfortunate lapse in security that allowed a guest to be assaulted. He casually mentioned the Beaumont and Wallace families were jointly reconsidering their annual 7-figure donation. The message was received. Within the hour, the foundation issued a statement condemning domestic violence and announced a new grant for a women's shelter made in Sophie Peterson's name. Without mentioning Mark, they had publicly cast him as the villain and Sophie as the courageous survivor. Grant then spent an hour methodically calling the city's power brokers, bankers, developers, and the influential wives who ran the charity circuit. He didn't spread gossip. He planted seeds of doubt. To one, he'd mentioned the importance of unimpeachable integrity. To another, he'd express his heartbreak at seeing Sophie so distressed. He was creating a narrative, a whisper campaign that moved faster than any headline. The accelerant on this fire was the gossip blog article Conrad's team had strategically leaked. The grainy photo of Mark with his hand raised, his face contorted in rage, was the proof everyone needed. The seeds Grant had planted bloomed into a forest of condemnation. Mark's phone, once a source of opportunity, became a vessel for social banishment. Texts from golf buddies and former allies arrived one after another, each a short, sharp blade severing a tie. He was a pariah. The final, most devastating blow was aimed at Mark's future. Grant knew about the secret real estate deal Mark was trying to broker with a group of ruthless venture capitalists, the same deal whose digital files Conrad had already vaporized. Grant arranged a chance meeting with the key investor Robert Chen in the steam room of an exclusive gym. Rob Grant set his voice a casual murmur in the thick, humid air. A word of friendly advice. I hear you might be looking at a deal with a guy named Mark Jennings. Chen, a shrewd operator, was immediately on high alert. We've had discussions. Why? Just be careful who you get into business with. Grant said, letting the silence hang between them. A man who can't control himself in public probably can't be trusted to control a multi-million-dollar project. It shows a profound lack of character, and character is the only currency I trade in. The veiled threat was unmistakable. An association with Mark Jennings was now radioactive, a guaranteed failure. Grant had salted the earth of Mark's last hope. Back in Conrad's secure apartment, Sophie was slowly healing. She had slept without fear and eaten without judgment. The suffocating anxiety that had been her constant companion for years was finally beginning to recede. She sat with Grant that afternoon, watching the city lights begin to twinkle. Is it wrong, she asked in a small voice, that a part of me is enjoying this? No, Soph. Grant replied, his tone gentle but firm. It's not wrong. It's called justice. He showed her the press release from the foundation, the one that would use her name to help countless other women. Your name will stand for strength. His will be a cautionary tale. But their clean, remote revenge was about to become dangerously real. Grant's phone rang, displaying Conrad's name. The call was clipped and urgent. He's on the move, Conrad said, dispensing with pleasantries. He pawned his watch for cash an hour ago. He used it to buy a used, untraceable car. Grant stood, his entire body tensing with a protective instinct. Where is he going? My team is tracking him via traffic cameras. Based on his trajectory, there's only one place he could be going. A place he knows means everything to you. Grant's blood ran cold. The lake house. It was her sanctuary, the one place she might run to for comfort. And Mark knew it. Davies and his team are already en route, Conrad said. But I think we should be there too. This needs to end. Face to face. The systematic demolition was over. The final confrontation was about to begin. The Peterson family lake house was a sanctuary from Sophie's childhood, a place of warmth and safety. It sat nestled in the pines overlooking Crystal Lake, and as dusk settled, it was dark save for a single inviting light in the main living room. This was the light Mark Jennings drove towards a man hollowed out by fear and filled with a bitter, desperate rage. After pawning his expensive watch for a handful of cash, he'd bought a junk car and driven for hours, fueled by the conviction that this was his last stand. He had to find Sophie. He had to make her fix what she had broken. He approached the house on foot through the woods, his heart pounding. The single light drew him in like a moth to a flame. He crept onto the wide veranda, his breath fogging in the cool night air, and peered through the large picture window. There she was, curled on a sofa near the fireplace, a book in her lap. She looked serene, a calm he found insulting. That peace was a world he was no longer a part of, and the sight of it ignited his fury. He tried the veranda door. It was unlocked. A smirk touched his lips. She was still careless, still trusting. He slipped inside his footsteps, swallowed by the thick carpet. "Sophie," he said, his voice a venomous whisper. Her head snapped up, her eyes widening in terror. The book tumbled to the floor as she scrambled to her feet, a hand flying instinctively to her pregnant stomach. "Mark, how did you find me? You need to leave, now." "Leave?" He let out a harsh, grating laugh. "I have nowhere to go. You and your cousins took everything from me. You destroyed my life." He advanced on her, his eyes wild. "We are going to fix this, you and I. You are going to pick up the phone, you are going to call your precious cousins, and you are going to tell them this was all a terrible mistake." A mistake Sophie's fear was rapidly being burned away by a surge of righteous anger. "You call striking your pregnant wife a mistake. You isolated me, you manipulated me, and you assaulted me. You don't get to demand anything from me ever again." "I made one error in judgment," he roared, taking another step. "And for that, I'm destroyed." "Is that the justice of the mighty Beaumonts and Wallaces?" "It is." The voice was not Sophie's. It came from the shadows near the great stone fireplace. Grant Wallace stepped into the light, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. From the main hallway, a second figure emerged. Conrad Beaumont, holding a slim tablet. Mark froze the blood draining from his face. The single light, the unlocked door. Sophie alone by the fire, it was a stage, and he was the fool who had just walked into the center of it. The security he'd glimpsed outside weren't for her protection from the world. They were for her protection from him. "You set me up," he stammered, his bravado crumbling into dust. "We anticipated you," Conrad said, his voice devoid of emotion. "We knew your ego wouldn't allow you to simply disappear. You are, if nothing else, predictable." Mark's gaze darted between the three of them, then to the silent, imposing figures of security men who now blocked his only exit. He was caged. "What more do you want?" he snarled. "You've bled my accounts, ruined my career, and made my name poison. What's left to take we're not finished?" Grant said, his voice dangerously low. "Everything we've done so far was for what you did to her." He nodded towards Sophie. "This next part is for what you tried to do to our family." Conrad held up the tablet, its screen glowing with financial charts and legal documents. "This is for a shell corporation called Jennings Apex Holdings, which you established 6 months after your wedding. And this," he swiped the screen, "is the paperwork for that real estate venture you had Sophie sign. You told her it was a joint investment to secure your future together." The trap was far more complex than Mark had imagined. This wasn't just about the slap. It wasn't an investment, was it? "Mark?" Conrad continued, his voice a clinical indictment. "You used Sophie's signature along with a forged power of attorney to secure a massive, high-risk loan. You put the Peterson family trust up as collateral. That money was funneled through your shell company to criminal partners. It was your escape plan. If the deal failed, our family would be on the hook for millions. If it succeeded, you'd vanish with the profits. The devastating twist landed in the silent room. Sophie let out a soft gasp, staring at Mark with horrified realization. The abuse, the control, it wasn't just the behavior of a cruel husband. It was the calculated strategy of a con artist. "He never loved me," she whispered the words, hanging in the air like smoke. It was all a business transaction. "You can't prove a thing," Mark blustered, but the panic in his eyes betrayed him. "I already have," Conrad stated. "My forensic accountants have the entire digital trail. We have a sworn statement from the bank officer you bribed. We have everything we need to send you to federal prison for bank fraud, wire fraud, and forgery. A very long time, Mark." Conrad set the tablet down and placed a thick legal folder beside it. "So you now have a choice," he said. "Door number 1. My security will escort you to the local authorities where a federal agent is waiting to arrest you. Or door number 2. He tapped the folder. "Inside are 2 things: a full signed confession to all your financial crimes and divorce papers, in which you relinquish all claims to Sophie's assets and terminate all parental rights to her child. You will sign everything. In exchange, you will be given a one-way ticket and a small stipend to live a quiet life of obscurity. This confession stays with me as insurance. The moment you ever try to contact Sophie or her child, it goes to the authorities. Prison or exile, annihilation or erasure." Mark stared at the folder, his world collapsing to a single impossible choice. He looked at Sophie, searching for any flicker of the woman he once controlled. He found none. The woman before him was a stranger, her eyes filled with a cold, hard strength. "You won't get away with this," he whispered, one last, pathetic act of defiance. Sophie took a step forward, her voice clear and ringing with power. "You're wrong, Mark. You're the one who didn't get away with it." His shoulders slumped. The fight was over. He was a broken man, utterly and completely defeated. He walked slowly to the table and reached for the pen. Under the watchful eyes of Sophie's cousins, Mark Jennings signed his life away. With a pen that felt unnaturally heavy, he initialed the confession to his financial crimes, the divorce papers that severed all ties to Sophie's assets, and the document that terminated his parental rights to their unborn child. Each signature was a nail in the coffin of his former life. When it was done, he was handed a manila envelope. Inside was a new passport, a one-way ticket to South America, and $10,000 in cash. A wire transfer will arrive monthly enough to live on. Not enough to matter. Conrad stated, his voice cold as steel. "The moment you attempt to contact Sophie or her child, the payments stop, and this confession goes to the U.S. Attorney. You are a ghost now. Stay that way." Mark nodded mutely and walked out of the house without a backward glance, a non-entity erased from the world he fought so desperately to conquer. The moment the door clicked shut, a strange sound filled the room. Sophie was laughing. It wasn't a laugh of joy, but of pure, unadulterated release, the sound of a rusted cage door finally breaking open. Tears streamed down her face in a cathartic storm of grief and liberation, washing away years of fear. Months passed. The scandal faded, and Mark Jennings became a forgotten name. Sophie, however, flourished. She moved into a sun-drenched brownstone, filling it with the life and color Mark had despised. She had reclaimed her world. Her true purpose was found when she took her seat on the Peterson Family Foundation board. Her first act was to establish the Phoenix Grant, a major fund providing legal and financial aid to women escaping abusive relationships. She was no longer a victim who had been saved. She was a survivor, building an army of her own. One crisp autumn afternoon, 7 months after that night, Grant and Conrad found her in the newly finished nursery. She sat in a rocking chair, a serene smile on her face, her hand resting on her large, round belly. "It's beautiful, Soph," Grant said softly. "Everything is ready," she replied, "just waiting on the guest of honor." Conrad, ever the stoic, stood beside her chair, his gaze softening as he took in the peaceful room. "You did well," he said, his highest form of praise. Sophie looked up at the 2 men who had been her saviors and her brothers. "We did well," she corrected him. "Thank you. For everything." A week later, Elizabeth Rose Peterson was born healthy and beautiful, with her mother's brilliant blue eyes. In the hospital room, Sophie held her daughter, her heart overflowing with a love so pure it eclipsed every shadow of her past. Grant and Conrad stood on either side of the bed, guardians watching over the family's future. Elizabeth gripped Conrad's finger with her impossibly small hand, and for the first time in years, the formidable CEO's face broke into a wood-unguarded smile. Sophie's new dawn had arrived. Her scars were not a sign of weakness, but a testament to her survival. As she looked at her daughter, she knew with every fiber of her being that their future was secure and bright. And that is the story of how one man's monstrous act of cruelty was met with an immediate and overwhelming force of family loyalty and absolute justice. It's a stark reminder that the deepest betrayals often come from those we trust the most. But it's also a powerful testament to the unbreakable bonds that can lift us from our darkest moments. Sophie's story isn't just about revenge. It's about reclamation. It's about a woman finding her voice, her strength, and her purpose after being silenced for far too long. She transformed her pain into power, creating a new life for herself and her daughter, and building a legacy of helping others. What did you think of Conrad and Grant's methods? Was their revenge justified? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of justice served resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who loves a story where the villains get exactly what they deserve. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next story. Thank you for listening.